Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and I would like to thank Reach Exit for sponsoring this episode. Reach Exit is a fast-growing recruitment firm in Japan that also runs eJable, E-J-A-B-L-E, a job board for English-speaking or bilingual tech jobs in Japan, and also Japanese-speaking jobs in other countries. They have linked to some very useful blog posts that they have created on Japanese business culture, and we have added them to the show notes, so please check them out. And on today's episode, we have Evan Burkosky. Evan is an angel investor, startup advisor, and the head of enterprise digital marketing at TechnoPro, a publicly traded company on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. Prior to this role, he worked as sales director or country manager for well-known global software companies like Optimizely, FullStory, Parsley, and Dynamic Yield. He is one of those unicorns who understands both marketing and sales to an expert level in Japan, and he will help us understand how to do marketing and sales for a B2B SaaS product. Did I mention that he is also an expert in digital transformation? Regardless, you're in for a treat. So Evan, it's really good to have you, and could you give a self-introduction, please?
Thank you so much, Tyson. It's a real pleasure to be on the podcast. I'm really impressed with the work you're doing here, putting together a great library of content for people like us who are looking to start up or scale up businesses in Japan. It's an honor to be in such good company. This month, it will be 20 years in Japan. During that time, I've started several companies. One of them was a digital marketing agency. One was a B2B, B2G SaaS product, software product. And I've also worked with several media agencies, solutions partners, and brought several overseas companies, software companies to the Japanese market. So had the opportunity while working as a solutions partner for Optimizely, for example, go to San Francisco several times and learn how they marketed and sold their product. Go to Tel Aviv when I was country manager with Dynamic Yield and learn how they did business there. And then try and hybridize those best practices to the Japanese market. Of course, everything requiring specific targeted approach to be successful in the Japanese market. So looking forward to talking about some of what I've learned along the way and hopefully sharing some useful tips and tricks.
And Evan and I have a very long history together, I think around 5 or 6 years. But when I started Japan Switch, I was actually a user of FullStory. And as I was using it, I found out that you're actually running sales there. So I was able to attend Evan's seminars on how to utilize FullStory better to improve our marketing website conversion rate optimization. So yeah, it's good to finally have you on. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. But to get started, yes, I guess, what are the 3 ways of getting leads for a B2B SaaS product?
All right. So when doing basically B2B sales and marketing, I think, especially in the context of your target audience, which is entrepreneurs who are running businesses in Japan and looking to scale up, or potentially startup entrepreneurs looking to enter the Japanese market, I'd like to focus everything that we talk about today through that lens of that particular audience. So I think what is most applicable are the immediately actionable techniques. So I'm going to reference a few materials, books, and courses and different things that I have found very helpful. So the first one I'm going to give a shout out to is Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross. And the sequel to that book, From Impossible to Inevitable by Aaron Ross and Jason Lemkin. Jason Lemkin started SaaSter, which is the community for SaaS salespeople. So Aaron Ross, in his first book, Predictable Revenue, he identified basically 3 methods of getting leads. And those were seeds, nets, and spears. So seeds, kind of what it sounds like, you're planting the seeds that will grow into future customers. And the team that usually does that is either your account managers, so this is the post-sales team, or your customer success team. And the goal here is to get lots of referrals, word of mouth, and renewals. Now, I'll be speaking quite a lot about the SaaS or software as a service business model because it's my area of expertise. And the most important metric to SaaS is renewals. In the SaaS model, you're paying a subscription for software, which in the old boxed software model would have been one very large, quite expensive software purchase. You might have paid 50, 150 or $250,000 or more dollars for software. But with SaaS, those payments are essentially split out over the long term. And so those annual or monthly payments going on for the long term, recurring until essentially the provider becomes profitable, that's essential. Now, the way to do that, of course, is with happy customers. So your account managers, your customer success team are essential for that. Net's pretty self-explanatory. You're trying to catch as many leads as possible. So these are your marketing efforts that bring essentially inbound leads, which are then handled by your inbound sales team. And this is the pre-sales team. So pre-sales and post-sales basically being before contract and after contract is signed. The nets here, it's talking about content marketing, the various strategies to get people to find and come to you. And then spears, again, fairly self-explanatory. This is more your outbound sales team who are identifying good target prospects, customers that most likely need your product or service, and then going out and developing a relationship with them. So quite proactively going out and finding them.
I love that analogy they used, referencing that it may not grow immediately, but if you plant enough seeds, you have a farm. And also the nets and spears. So let's say you got to go get that fish and you need to eat it now. So that's the quickest way to go and get it. But for nets, you got to build the net. You got to find the best materials. You got to find the right place to put it. It takes a lot of trial and error. But once you get a good setup, you'll catch fish.
And same with spears. That's going where the fish are most likely to be and waiting until you see a good one and catching it.
So what are some of the different channels for selling in Japan?
The Japanese market is unique in that I think the seeds methodology is probably the most well-established, well-entrenched. And this is partly because of cultural reasons. Of course, you don't want to cause meiwaku, or basically be annoying in Japanese culture. So aggressive sales tactics, going out and starting a conversation from sort of a cold open, that's not really done in the Japanese market. It's much more about building relationships, building personal trust, and then getting referrals through that. And so I think it's very important to respect that culture and utilize it. When we talk about channels, we're talking about that mix of both, word of mouth, inbound marketing efforts, and then outbound sales, that sort of mixed matrix of different techniques. I think the other thing that's especially unique to the Japanese market is building on that trust issue. Probably the most important tool for both marketing and sales in the Japanese market is the case study, or Seiko Jire, success story. And I think this is important for both marketing and sales, where if you have a customer who is so happy with your product or service that they're willing to have their story told, it's extremely powerful. But I've found that a lot of people trying to enter the Japanese market or get started in the Japanese market, they make the mistake of taking a story that worked for another market and localizing it to the Japanese market. And that's just not very impactful. It's very important to tell a story about a Japanese user using it in a Japanese environment so that it's much more relatable and it helps to build trust. So as you're building out your case studies, make absolutely sure that you're telling the correct narrative for this market. So if you've been successful selling your product in even a close market like Singapore, it's just not going to have the impact that it does selling that and then telling that success story in Japan.
I've had a lot of entrepreneurs tell me that story where they did sales to a company, they seemed interested, and they said, please contact us after you get a successful use case in Japan.
Right. A lot of the times prospects in Japan won't even really want to have that conversation until it's been proven for the Japanese market. So it's very important, catch-22 or chicken and egg thing, but you can often get around this by doing a POC, a proof of concept, whether that be free or paid, And then if the customer is successful and happy with their success afterwards, then they may be willing to have their story published. And that can help to get your initial flywheel going so that you can build up a marketing and sales engine around that. Also, I found that not just for marketing, but for sales, the case study is your most important tool, because when you're doing outbound sales and starting a new conversation, starting a new relationship, if you have this high quality information to share, then it helps to accelerate the sales conversation.
So I have friends who have done proof of concept with companies. Those at the Series A level, those have product market fit. They have some success cases. They've been able to charge money for a proof of case with potential new clients. But maybe for someone in the seed stage who's just entering the Japan market, or they're based in Japan, what tips would you have for them for getting a paid POC?
Well, the seed stage is usually in the net, spears, and seeds analogy. Seeds is usually an existing customer already. So that's where you have existing customers who are essentially willing to give referrals or create these case studies already. Now, it's more impactful to have a localized case study than to have nothing. So say you've been successful in another market like Singapore or maybe South Korea, or somewhere in the region is helpful. And if you use that and localize it into Japanese, you can at least get the conversation going that way. But as quickly as possible, try to create a narrative specific to the Japanese market. Quite often for companies who are selling to more global markets, they're able to get these stories or get initial traction by having the Japanese members of a global team start to use the product. If you could identify any users within your existing customer base who are native Japanese, they might not be based in Japan. They might be currently in Singapore. They might be in San Francisco or Sydney or somewhere like that. But if they're willing to talk about using the product in Japanese, then that can be very impactful. So that can help you get that initial flywheel going. For
some of the companies I've mentored in their Japan market entry, that has worked. Maybe they've sold to the Japanese company's subsidiary in another country, or just connections through their current clients who has a connection through Japan. So that is a good strategy based on what I've seen as well.
It's all about being as relatable as possible and feeling that you're as close to the existing needs that your target customers have as possible. So, of course, it's very important to create your ICP or ideal customer profile, target who your users are, and then segment out the different audiences that you might have, and then make sure that you're creating the correct narrative for that audience. And essentially, the reason is because marketing and sales, with the power of the internet, they are converging. In fact, I'm a proponent of combining marketing and sales into something that might be called just the revenue team. And maybe it's overseen by CRO or Chief Revenue Officer instead of like Sales VP and CMO and different positions, because they're so closely interconnected. And the reason it come that way is because the marketing and sales process is essentially, marketing is educating people about your product in sort of the macro view, top of funnel. And then sales is educating them to remove all doubt so that they're comfortable purchasing the product or service. That's just different steps or different stages in the funnel. And it's so interconnected at this point because customers can now do their own research that by the time they come to a salesperson, a lot of the time they've done all of their own research. They have very specific questions and they need somebody who can just help them through the remaining steps of the sales process. So if your marketing team is creating excellent content that allows them to self-educate and essentially be quite far down the pipeline before even talking to the sales team, sometimes they can self-service and purchase without having to talk to a salesperson at all. And then sometimes the salesperson just has to help them with essentially stakeholder alignment throughout the rest of their organizations that they can make the purchase.
So I think Evan gave some really good tips for increasing the likelihood of potentially getting a paid POC. I think at the seed stage, it's extremely hard. I've had a seed stage company sell to us when I was at OneCoin English, and we did make a deal with them, but we asked for significant discounts because they didn't have a proven case. It's very risky for them to do a paid one, let alone even just a free one. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is hard.
POC is very common to SaaS sales and also to consulting services. People do need to sort of feel like they're able to get hands-on and try out the product or service before making a long-term commitment. It is very difficult for a Japanese organization to make any purchasing decision without answering a lot of questions to remove all skepticism. So essentially, the purchasing decision in almost any Japanese organization goes through the Ringisho process. Ringisho is basically a decision document that's circulated to all stakeholders. And that's a top-down and sort of middle-up process. And sometimes that goes through several iterations, top management down to middle management back up to top down, and so on, until all doubt has been removed. All questions have been answered in as much detail as possible so that all stakeholders feel comfortable, doubt has been removed. The problem with that process, and one of the pitfalls that startups especially need to avoid in the Japanese market, is that in order to sign off on a POC, there's a tendency to request a lot of customization. And customization can be good in the early stages because you learn a lot about your customers' needs. But in order for a SaaS product to work, it has to be repeatable, it has to be scalable, it has to be templatable. So if you have customer A that's asking for too much customization, and that's not applicable to customer B, you won't be able to build a scalable sales process, marketing process, or a customer success process to service that product, and you simply will not find product market fit. So you have to find the commonalities, and doing a few POCs with a bit of a range of customers can help you learn where those commonalities are. So that's mutually beneficial. You're learning what's going to work for the Japanese market across a range of customers so that you can, again, find those commonalities and then scale that up.
That is some awesome advice, and thank you for that. But could you tell us a little bit more about inbound sales?
Inbound sales, it's closely connected with content marketing. Ideally, the power of the internet allows you to disseminate content across multiple different channels. I'm a strong proponent of a multi-channel content marketing strategy. So you could use something like the somewhat famous Gary V framework, where maybe you do a video interview with somebody or you hold a webinar and then you disseminate that out. You can take screenshots from the video to put up on your blog. You can take the transcript of the video to create blog posts or longer form content, maybe ebooks. You can take audio clips to put out on podcasts like this one. And that allows you to create multiple streams of content for multiple different platforms. Now, you want to tie this into, again, your ICP or ideal customer profile so that you're targeting the audiences on the platforms they're likely to be. Let's say use your services, for example, Tyson. If you're helping scale ups with various issues that they're facing as they're going through their growing pains, essentially, you're probably targeting business professionals. And so you would want to be disseminating content on maybe Facebook and LinkedIn, and you could use Instagram short clips to pull people into webinars and that sort of thing. But you probably wouldn't be using maybe Pinterest or a more visual medium, right? Your users aren't likely to be so much on that platform. So you have to do some research and A/B test to find out what works. But once you've targeted your audience, essentially found where those fish are and where they're likely to swim and in which direction, then you set out that net so that you're able to catch them. And what you're doing is trying to not interrupt them as they're going about their daily personal or work life, but rather help them through the education process. And this is a big shift from traditional marketing and advertising. Obviously, traditional media agencies like the Mad Men sort of Manhattan ad agency world, that was very much about very high level creative work because you were trying to capture people's attention because essentially you were interrupting them. So it was like, people are watching TV and a commercial comes on and it either has to entertain them in some way or capture their attention through some unique hook. Otherwise, they're just going to tune out. But that model doesn't work anymore because through the power of the internet, people are self-educating and they're in a completely different frame of mind. So you have to create content that's likely to both capture their attention and help them with a specific issue, which means you have to be very targeted and very niche. So creating blog posts or ebooks or doing webinars, various types of valuable content that's specifically targeted to your niche audience is going to help capture their attention and bring them in. And then you want to bring them from your various channels. So you might have a TikTok account, you might have a YouTube channel, you might have whatever it is, podcasts, Clubhouse, all sorts of different channels, but you want to funnel them in to somewhere like your website where you can educate them a little bit more, remove any questions that they may have, and then get them to undertake a conversion from somebody who's just browsing content to somebody who's more actively researching. And that would be through a call to action, like downloading some content so that you're learning more about who they are. You might gate that content with their email address and phone number, for example, so that you can then reach out to them. So inbound sales is all about, essentially getting the fish to sort of swim more or less in your direction, giving them more and more sort of bait so that they keep swimming along that funnel that you've created and you get them into your net.
I wanted to give another big thank you to our supporters Reach Exit and eJabble. If you have not visited the eJabble site yet, there's a ton of great content on job hunting and also how to succeed working in a Japanese company. Not getting enough Japanese work culture content to fulfill your appetite through our podcast? Check out their website for more good content. See the link in the show notes below. Shout out and thank you to Himanshu Jain and the team for supporting this podcast. Gotcha. So the listeners out there, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, this is the first time I'm ever asking. I highly recommend you subscribe on Spotify or Apple. Let's say that's not your thing. I also have a LinkedIn newsletter where I announce podcasts, and you're welcome to subscribe to that. I'll have that on the notes. And the reason you want to subscribe to that is because from time to time, we do free seminars with experts like accountants, labor experts, and you can ask them questions for free, which would normally cost you tens of thousands of yen. So I highly recommend you jump on my B2B train. Sorry for that. Seemed like the perfect opportunity to ask.
And I'll second that, because for your target audience, like I said at the start, you're getting a great network of experts together, sharing greatly detailed information that's hard to find anywhere else. So yeah, definitely subscribe.
And yes, I think you talked a little bit about kind of like the customer journey with the B2B sites about helping people, but could you go into a little bit more about the customer journey from first learning about you to maybe making a purchase?
Yeah, so I think it's important to realize that the customer journey is very lengthy. It can go on over a period of months or years. And if you're trying to sell to a large organization, it's most likely that in the Japanese market, this cycle will be on average 18 months. So it usually starts with a recognized need on the part of the customer. They've identified that they would like to do something different. And I like to say that all sales comes down to selling one thing: change. You're selling a process that will change how they do their work in some way, or you're selling something that will make them more efficient, but you have to convince them to make a change. And in the Japanese market, that's extremely difficult because, well, people respect tradition, they respect existing processes, and again, you need full stakeholder alignment to make any sort of a change. So your customer journey is starting with awareness that something needs to be changed. Something is not working, something is outdated, something is inefficient. And so, especially when it comes to inbound sales, the sales process, it often seems like it's shorter because you're involved for a shorter period. In reality, it's going on for usually the same amount of time, but your marketing efforts are probably helping with a longer part of that journey. So what I mean by that is there's a recognized need to make a change. And so somebody is tasked with going out and researching, and they will talk to their friends. They'll do some Google searches. Increasingly, they might not be typing out the Google search. They might be doing a voice search, or because it's topical right now, I'll just touch on this quickly. They might actually be asking an AI assistant questions. So Chat GPT being quite big in our social feeds this past couple of weeks. this is a paradigm shift where we're moving from a text-based world to a conversation-based world for finding this type of information. But it's the intersection of the analog world where you maybe asked your friend at dinner what they would recommend in terms of the software they're using, to now being able to ask an AI assistant what they recommend. But it's starting with this search for information. So if you're the person who's been tasked with researching this change you need to make, you gather as much information as you can, you look at as many different websites as possible, you listen to different podcasts. When you're trying to learn something new, most of the time you're going to YouTube or maybe TikTok, because video is an excellent learning medium. And once you feel like you've gathered enough information, you'll start to favorite certain sources of information. And those sources of information, now flipping it over to the vendor side, you want that to be your website, or you want that to be your podcast or your YouTube channel that they're coming to repeatedly, because that builds trust. So this is a period usually of several months or even years where they're coming back to your content to learn more and becoming more and more familiar with it. And usually taking several different actions. So signing up for webinars or subscribing to your podcast or YouTube channel, downloading information, and maybe from time to time asking a question. They might interact with a chatbot on your website to ask some questions. They might send a direct question to your sales team or your success team. But that relationship develops over time, and the comfort to come to you as the source of information develops over time.
I find that having an inbound sales strategy makes it much easier when you do outbound. And what I mean by that is, in my case, I'm not actively looking for consulting clients anymore, but when I was actively looking for consulting clients, I would see who's my listeners and I would reach out to them. And if they weren't ready at the moment for me to advise them, I would ask them like, oh, do you know anyone who might be interested? I've done a bunch of inbound sales marketing strategies, but because that trust was developed over months and months, I actually had some success with people introducing their friend, even though they weren't ready for my assistance at the moment.
To touch on it quickly, I make one distinction between inbound sales and outbound sales. And that is, with an outbound sales team, you're just trying to have the conversation earlier. Simple as that. The customer journey needs to go through a process of self-education until they're comfortable and willing to come talk to you. That's the inbound sales process. With the outbound sales process, you're identifying that somebody is ready to have this conversation earlier, and you're going out and starting the conversation with them. It doesn't mean the old interruptive sales model where you're just calling everybody and hoping somebody is ready to have that conversation. It means you're basically going through a process of what's called warm calling, or outbound sales 2.0 is another word for it. But you identify activities online that they're interacting with content, or they've followed your LinkedIn channel, or they have identified themselves in some way as being a potential prospect, and you can afford to go have the conversation earlier. Now, the reason I say afford to have the conversation earlier is that with an inbound sales team, you don't have the overhead of dedicated salespeople. You have more sales response people. So they're basically less expensive. They're often a little bit more junior. They might be like an SDR is a common terminology for it, or BDR, sales development representative or business development representative. And they're usually a smaller team who are able to respond to incoming interest. An outbound sales team does much more prospecting, which is a very time-intensive process. And so in order to afford an outbound sales team, you need to be selling software that's at least around the $3,000 per year subscription mark. Or if it's a consulting service or project-based, you would want that to be 3 times that, because with the subscription, you're hoping for it to last at least 3 years. So you'd be looking at around the $30,000 to $50,000 mark just to have an outbound sales team. So quick, bit of advice to startup founders: you can't afford outbound sales until you're at that price point.
Yeah, I was reflecting on some of the companies that were considering that, and that was very helpful. Do you have any other thoughts on the distinction before we jump back into inbound?
Well, other than that price point and whether you can afford dedicated sales professionals to go out and have this conversation or not, the focus is on the quality of that conversation. So can you provide enough content that your customers are completely self-educated and have answered all of the questions that they're likely to face internally by the time they get to you, then great. You only need an inbound sales response team, inbound marketing and sales team. But if it's a really complex sale and you need to help them through that purchasing process, that stakeholder alignment, Lingi show process, then you need a dedicated sales team that's done that before and knows how to guide them through that process. And I think this is probably the number one mistake that outbound salespeople make in the Japanese market, is assuming that their prospects actually know how to buy something like your product or service. Most of the time they don't. You know, if I'm a mid-level manager in a Japanese company tasked with purchasing something, this isn't what I do every day, right? Probably do this maybe once or twice a year, if that much. So I might not know what my company's processes are. But as a salesperson who's sold to dozens of companies that fit that profile, then I probably do know how to craft a Lingi show, how to overcome the most common likely questions or the skeptics in the organization, how to identify the skeptics in the organization, because they're often the most important people. And if you involve them in the conversation early and often, then your sale is most likely to proceed much more quickly and smoothly. So I think a really good outbound salesperson is a guide not only of your product, but of your customer's own organization and how to make that decision-making process and get stakeholder alignment to move to the contract.
I'm going to dive a little bit back into inbound sales, but I think one really important thing is when getting leads, it's getting good leads. But could you tell us more about lead qualification for an inbound sales?
I like to think of lead qualification in terms of structured data. You can qualify whether a prospect is a good lead or not by the type of actions that they're taking. But you need to be able to identify whether that person fits into one of your target audience segments and whether their intent is high or not. And the best way to do that is by tracking the actions that they take. And you can do that with a well-structured website by making sure that your code fits the expected structure that tools like Google Analytics or other analytics programs like FullStory would use to track that journey. And then making sure that the action points you need them to take are properly tagged and recorded as events. You can automate the tracking of the journey. So if your website is structured correctly, and if you have, for example, the meta pixel on it so that you can then retarget that audience as they go over to other channels, maybe you would retarget them with that example I used earlier of a Instagram short video ad invitation to join a webinar or something like that. If all of this is structured correctly, then you're basically building up the database which machine learning can run on. And let's just say broad category AI in this case, because then you can run marketing automation tools which will automatically apply a score to that lead as they take these various actions. If somebody comes to the website and say you have a target of having them view a detailed product information page where they have to spend some time on that page and read a certain amount down the page in order to achieve a score. So you can set up an event where once somebody has read 75% of the page, that event is fired, and it puts that lead into a scoring system where maybe this is just arbitrary numbers, but say 5 points are added. And then if that person comes back again to the website and self-identifies by maybe downloading some information, then you can add maybe another 20 points or so. Now, there are complexities here in a post-cookie world because it's more difficult to identify people. You need to encourage them to self-identify by taking actions where they do something like share their email address or phone number. It gets a little bit more complex as we move into a world that's more safe and secure for users online. But if you structure things correctly so that you're able to track the journey and understand the actions that they're taking, you can then build up this lead scoring system. Marketing automation tools are great for that. Obviously, a CRM or customer resource management tool like HubSpot or Salesforce. This is a really important component of that tech stack. And this data then, if it's properly structured, can feed into machine learning tools which then help you automate other processes in your marketing and sales techniques.
Based on my experiences buying Japanese software for my previous company, because most of the operations was in Japanese, a lot of times they do require you to put your phone number, or if you want the sales material or the prices, you often have to reach out or give your email address.
Yes, I think an important thing to touch on here is that the Japanese market is uniquely forgiving of the number of fields on forms. So I think partly because of the culture where it's common to have to fill out multiple fields to accomplish almost anything in Japan. I've seen that most gated content in Japan has a really high number of fields, 15, 20 or more. In Western markets, it would be almost impossible to have a high conversion rate with more than 3 fields. But it does seem to be a unique aspect of the Japanese market that people are patient. Now, don't have fields in your forms that are not necessary. So don't ask them, to fill out their residential address, for example. If that data doesn't actually matter for your marketing or sales process, keep it as lean as possible and your conversion rate will be higher.
And the typical ones I've seen is email address, phone number of people in your company, your position, and where did you hear about it?
Right. And those are intuitive fields. Obviously, they're helping with that lead scoring process. You want to make sure that the person is in the correct department. So if you sell a tool for, say, the PR department, but this person is in sales, maybe it's not the right fit for them. So you would lessen that lead score or possibly disqualify them from your follow-up process. And the same thing with the number of people in the organization. If they're a 10,000 person organization, they probably have a budget for your product. If they're a 5-person organization, maybe they don't have a budget. And so maybe you would disqualify them for that reason.
I guess in terms of lead qualification, is there anything unique for Japan that you've done for like qualifying or classifying leads?
Well, I think it's important, sort of tying into that number of fields. Title is very important because it's somewhat unforgivable if you reach out to somebody and get their name, their department, their title, or any of those incorrect in the outreach email. So that's one reason why correct title is often included in these fields as well as department. I think that there are cultural reasons why you would want to be very careful about using automated field entry. So what usually happens with a marketing automation system is that you build out a contact profile, often in the CRM, and then you pull that over into the marketing automation system to power essentially your responses. So if you send out an email or text message or even a social media message, you can have fields populated. But it's very, very difficult to have these fields populated correctly in Japanese. And you can usually tell if it's auto-populated. So in the Western world, because we're more casual about titles, if I get an email that says, "Hello, Evan, thanks for downloading our webinar recording. Would you like, here's a link to download the slides from this presentation," I probably wouldn't take offense. But a Japanese person would if it didn't have their name correctly formatted with last name and then first name in that order, and the title and so on. So you have to be very careful with this. I have, from personal experience, have found that you can't really do automated field population. You have to do this part manually to make sure that you're matching it to the customer. And then you also have to make sure that you're using the correct level of formality with your language. Japan having about 3 levels of written language in terms of casual to polite to ultra polite. And Tyson, as the Japanese N1 holder, you are familiar with Keigo. If you get the Keigo wrong in your email, it's unlikely to be taken well.
I've always gotten the Japanese staff to double check whenever it involves a Keigo, and not just any Japanese staff, managerial level Japanese staff. Junior level staff may not understand Keigo, so be careful.
One other thing I'd like to touch on quickly is how there's a huge shift going on right now in the Japanese market because of the pandemic disruption. So most marketing and sales teams relied on in-person events until the pandemic. And so it has been very difficult for the past few years because most salespeople really relied on business cards, meishi. And the tradition was you would go to an in-person event, you would collect as many business cards as possible, and that was in the form of raffles where you might win a prize, or just putting your Macy into a jar at the desk to pick up a brochure or something like that. Or, of course, any conversation you had with anyone, you would exchange your Macy or business card. It used to be that the best way to power marketing automation or the multiple touch points on that customer journey would be to take those cards and then scan them, put them into something like Sansan, which is a type of social network, sort of like a cross between, well, an analog scanner crossed with maybe LinkedIn, it would be a good analogy, or their lighter product called 8. You would digitize that and export a CSV and then maybe import that into your CRM. That works, but there's been a big shift because it's very rare to now get the actual paper Macy because there aren't as many in-person events, although they're slowly coming back. It's no longer the mainstream workflow. Now it's much more common to use a tool like 8 to share content as part of your channel, one of the channels in your marketing mix. And then when somebody follows your content or likes it, or you identify a prospect you'd like to connect with, request a virtual exchange of those cards, and then put that information into your CRM. So things are changing a lot. And that's one reason why, when mentioned webinars several times here, webinars, I feel, have become probably the primary tool of sales and marketing teams now. Because if you're running regular high quality webinars and sharing high quality information, again, you get that video content that you can then disseminate out on, blog using the written form. You can even use AI tools to auto dictate and get the transcript of that webinar content. And with a little bit of touch up and editing, then you can share that on blog and ebooks and that sort of thing, as well as, again, the audio stream and the video stream and the still photos that you can pull from that. So webinars are an extremely powerful tool for both marketing and sales teams.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Scaling Japan. In addition to serving as your fine host, I also provide advisory and coaching services to business owners who want to 2x, 5x, and even 10x their business. So stop holding your company and your team and your employees back, and let me help you and your company scale. Find more information at scalingyourcompany.com. Now back to the episode. Yeah, I've been pretty happy with the quality of webinars in Japan. I think maybe like pre-COVID, I'm having a hard time recalling how many Japanese online Japanese webinars. It's not too many. It was mainly I had to go in person. I had to go all the way across Tokyo just for a 30-minute promotion and 45-minute speech from a guest. But nowadays, if I'm looking for anything for HR related in marketing, how to add more automation to your marketing, you can find a lot of webinars if you look for it. But let's say if I wanted to do a webinar, typically I might post it on social media. I could do a Facebook or LinkedIn boost. But what are some other ways to promote a webinar in Japan?
I think you touched on the most important one, which is YouTube. YouTube has become the social network where people go to learn new skills. So I think the audience that tends to collect on YouTube is people who are looking to learn something, whether it be about digital marketing or, case in point, a friend gave me a guitar a while back, so I've been watching a bunch of YouTube videos to get better at playing the guitar. You can learn anything on YouTube, and it has become the go-to channel for that. So that's a great place to start with webinar content. But then it's good to take the little clips of that, almost like little preview videos, 15 seconds or so, and put them on other channels like TikTok, where the algorithm will target that to your target audience and you'll capture people's attention. So you can pull initial views of videos, people who've clicked on TikTok or Instagram videos, you can pull them to the longer form YouTube channel. Once they've watched a few of those longer form YouTube videos and really become familiar with your brand and you've built up trust, then you can often get them to come over to the website where they engage with deeper levels of content. So it's going from kind of the top of the funnel, light content, little clips, maybe infographics and short form text content, posts and so on, into the longer form content as they build trust with you and they're ready to learn more. And then the ultimate, in my opinion, is a book. So if you gather all those webinars and all that content and you put it into a manuscript and then you publish that, then you're really going to pull people in and access an even wider market. So most of the really good marketers that I know in the Japanese market, they will publish a book about their area of expertise at some point.
I've seen some massive and very high quality reports published by Japanese companies and never have enough time to read them.
They can be time intensive, but just the fact that they put all that effort in to create the long form content builds trust. And so you know that they're a respected, trusted brand.
Oh, and one strategy I seen one company do, which I thought was pretty clever, is so I went to download an ebook and it took me to a download page. And in the download page, they also had, you could download the case study, kind of like the proof of concept. But yeah, you could download a case study. So that was a nice strategy they used. And it was a Japanese company who did this.
HubSpot. So they kind of supplanted Salesforce for the small business to medium-sized business market in Japan by doing a really clever strategy. Everything is integrated. So they started with marketing automation, shared a lot of content about content marketing. So a lot of long-form blog posts, ebooks, white papers, downloadable content, YouTube videos, and so on, to build up trust for their product. That started with market automation, but then they also started providing the CRM and created that ecosystem. And probably the really uniquely clever thing they did in the Japanese market is then provide certification on their platform so that a lot of individual consultants, web developers, and small systems integrators became approved reseller partners of the HubSpot platform. And that built up more trust so that when they had an event, they would have the whole community of people come together and share this information. And that touches on another essentially marketing and sales channel, but I would say it's quite key to build up a community of users. So you want people either approved as like solutions consultants on your product or your service, or just like-minded users who get together and share information. You can start this quite simply by having a Slack channel or maybe a Facebook group, or having in-person meetups where people share information. But the creation of that community builds the word of mouth and then helps to build those case studies, which then creates that marketing and sales engine.
And do you have any other tools or software maybe unique to the Japanese market for, I guess, like inbound? One example I'll give is Medium. I don't think it's so popular here, but people tend to use something called Note sometimes. But is there anything else kind of like that, like software that is maybe used in the West, but maybe they use a different one in Japan?
I would say maybe let's touch on the commonalities. So if we're talking about a content marketing strategy, WordPress is very popular for creating websites on. There are a lot of WordPress developers. I'd say it's become the de facto standard, and it's fully multilingual capable, so that works well. It's important to make sure that whatever tools you're using or the tech stack you're building can be easily localized into Japanese, so that you're not running into either SEO issues or character encoding issues. Essentially, short form content or medium form content like Notion is another one, and Medium to a certain extent. I think they're growing in popularity in Japan. One thing that's not popular in Japan is social networks like LinkedIn, because it's really only bilinguals who tend to use that platform. Conversely, Facebook is increasingly used almost exclusively for business content. It seems like most Facebook pages are moving more and more into business usage. And I think that maybe that just reflects the aging demographic that's on Facebook. I see that when we're talking about social media channels, Line is often put forth as the most popular social network. I think it's important to make a distinction there, because the way most people use Line is not posting content where other people can comment and share on it, but actually using it just as a communication platform like WhatsApp. But it is definitely increasingly a channel where you can actually do advertising and retargeting. So for those who are actually sharing public content online, it's a very valuable channel. And maybe, again, we can put in the show notes the most popular social networks in Japan, because I think that would be beneficial when you're building out your marketing mix strategy.
Like I actually went on LinkedIn and I was like trying to find who's actually the biggest Japanese influencer I could find. One of the top one was the guy who wrote probably the only or few books on LinkedIn in Japan. Other famous people, but I think they only got like 500 likes at most.
I don't think you'll see as many sort of like super influencers on LinkedIn, but I remember that post, and I think you identified quite a few good ones, so you should probably link to that post. I think there's a distinction in that we're probably looking for English content on LinkedIn for the Japanese market. So that's already a very small niche, right?
And yeah, I jumped into like Japanese people posting in Japanese for a Japanese audience. And the highest engagement I saw was around maybe 300 to 500 likes. Compared to like, if you look for famous ones, like in the West, it's like 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. So I wanted to use that to also show the big difference in the engagement levels.
You certainly see engagement in the thousands on more Facebook posts if they're
exactly,
in Japanese, for the Japanese market.
And Line, yeah, I haven't yet done it for B2B, but B2C Line business open rate versus email open rate versus Line open rates, it's uncomparable. Uncomparable meaning Line just swept the floor of email for B2C, right, at least.
An important thing to touch on is the increasing usage of AI tools. So whether it's in your lead scoring or maybe the sales tech stack, identification of how your reps are doing, the keywords that they're talking about. So that would be tools like Gong, or even creating content using tools like Chat GPT to create content. There are several good tools. I think it's now called Jasper AI, that you can start feeding a few sentences in, and it essentially writes articles for you, and then you can go in and tune them a little bit. Those are very useful tools that are available to languages that have large data sets like English and Chinese, but they're not very accurate for the Japanese market. There are several startups that are creating these for the Japanese language, and they have to use different algorithms because, while Japanese, again, it's a smaller database to work with, and there are unique written and grammatical issues. But increasingly, those type of AI tools are really helpful when it comes to both the marketing and sales process. So I'll try and create a list that you can share in the show notes.
I did not know that, and thanks for sharing that. I find a lot of foreigners in Japan don't know the common tools used in Japan. And I think, let's say, knowing these, like kind of like what's popular, like Note, or like if you were to do events, Facebook, but doing things like PTX, knowing these things will help you develop more rapport with Japanese people if Japan is your target audience and market.
Right. So PTX is a really good one. I was going to mention that as well. So it's a product that was, let's say, created for the needs of the Japanese market, although the founding team was international, Japanese and American. It has become, in many ways, the de facto platform for events, whether they're in person or webinars. So it's a payment system, like a payment gateway combined with event calendars and social media. It's essentially a social network. That's a very common tool, very popular tool. But I think it's important to realize that there's going to be like a Japanese version of almost any tool. We shouldn't try to apply the most commonly globally used tools to the Japanese market, because almost every time there's a unique tool for a specific reason, cultural, linguistic, or, well, just usage practices.
I'm more from a marketing background, now learning sales, but for me, it's very rare for me to meet someone who I feel like they know more about in both marketing and sales than I do. Evan is really one of those unicorns that really understands both, but more importantly, how to apply both so you can have your seeds, your nets, and your spears all working together in coordination to increase your company's revenue. I guess any last messages for the audience or requests?
Well, we tried to be concise, but we touched on a lot of different points here. I think we could branch off and probably have 5 different podcasts out of this. So I'm sure people will have a lot of follow-up questions, and I'd like to encourage people to reach out to me. Having started a few startups in the Japanese market, I know how hard it is. And I do try to give advice. And I'm always happy to share my information or the lessons that I've learned from trying to bring different companies to the Japanese market. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out. We could share my website and LinkedIn profile. But yeah, please don't hesitate. I'm always happy to give advice, as I think gives Tyson. That's probably why we're both advisors on a few of these different groups together.
And I have to emphasize, it's hard to find someone who's senior level and really amazing at even just sales or marketing alone. And in Evan's case, he's a master of both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we could also just mention that if anybody wants to reach out in Japanese, please feel free to. I read and speak Japanese.
And look forward to having you on again.
All right. Likewise. Thanks very much, Tyson.